Welcome to Psych Talk. I'm your host, Dr. Jessica Rabin, a licensed clinical psychologist. If you are a mental health professional, student in the social science field, or just interested in psychology and mental health, this podcast is for you. Although topics discussed on this podcast are similar to therapy, Psych Talk is not a replacement for therapy and is for educational and entertainment purposes only. So let's dive into today's episode. Hey everyone, welcome back to Psych Talk, and thank you so much for joining me for today's episode. Today I have a very special guest with me, Dr. Sabrina Romanoff, who is a licensed clinical psychologist. So Dr. Sabrina, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Jessica. I'm so excited to be here.
So before we jump into our discussion, which I know we are both super excited to talk about, do you mind introducing yourself, a little bit about your background, what you do, and anything you really want to share with the listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Dr. Sabrina Romanoff. I'm a clinical psychologist in New York City, and my work really focuses on relationships. So how we connect and where we tend to get stuck in them, and really how our past can shape the way that we're showing up with people in the present. So a lot of the work that I do is helping people understand that a lot of the really strong reactions that they feel in relationships, especially the intense ones, they're not random or irrational in any way. There's this quote that if it's hysterical, it's historical, meaning like the really strong reactions we have are often speaking to like deeper wounds. And so usually our reactions, they're deeply wired. And once we can understand them, we can learn to work with them instead of feeling like controlled by them.
hmm I love that. The hysterical is historical. I've definitely heard that before, but I forgot I had heard that until you just said it again. So I'm gonna kind of keep that in the back of my mind.
It contextualizes our reactions, right? And I think in
hmm
relationships, that's like where everything gets activated. So it's so
hmm
important to like know ourselves better and our wounds and kind of where they do get activated.
Absolutely. So how did you come to specialize in relationship?
I think relationships are just fascinating. I see them as the heartbeat of our existence. Like you can feel totally regulated and safe and really confident on your own. But then as
hmm
soon as maybe someone's in the picture and you're kind of like waiting for a text back from them, you can very easily question your entire self-worth. And that could be in a romantic context, it can be in a friendship context, in a work one. And that shift just fascinates me so much about how our sense of safety and our sense of who we are can so easily be defined in context of other people. And I think what draws me into relationships is that when you kind of pull on that red thread of that strong reaction, you go away to the past and you see that they're often linked to our very early attachment experiences. And that's like
hmm
how safe we felt or how connected and like consistent love was, and if we had to really work hard for it or earn it. So I think when something feels off in a current relationship, it's rarely just about you and that person in a vacuum.
hmm
It's all of your past and all of their past. And it's really your nervous system reacting to something like so much bigger at stake, almost like you're in
hmm
danger. And so I think there's so many hidden aspects of the past that almost act as like portals, like sucking us back in. They can easily have this like death grip on us. So the more we understand the portal and our wounds, the less likely we are to kind of get sucked back into them.
hmm I love so many things you just said there. And I think one of the first things you said was you described relationships as the heartbeat. Um, and it got me thinking about how relationships are so important to human beings. You know, we have seen in recent years this loneliness epidemic where people are more isolated than ever. And I was recently talking to someone about how when we have strong supportive relationships, how much it helps our mental health that maybe we don't even realize when we have a friend to call when something's going on or when we actually spend time in real life in community with other people. And with that being said, I think you just highlighted so beautifully how it's not just about you and that person, because all of our past experiences, all of our past relationships are going to impact how we relate to other people, how we show up, how people probably respond to the way we are showing up. So there's what I'm hearing is so many layers to relationships, even if it's just between two individuals.
Absolutely. And what you're saying too is like it's in our best interest to be strongly connected to the people around us. But sometimes, like, we self-sabotage in our relationships or we don't get that connection we really want. And it's so unfortunate when that happens because I think more and more we're substituting real human connection with like stimulation from food and
Hmm.
social media and just scrolling and having almost like a friend in your phone. And real human connection can never be replaced in that way.
Hmm. Hmm. I'm sure we will probably touch on phones more throughout our discussion, but that's something I talk about frequently as somebody who primarily works with teens. Social media in some ways can be so great. You can stay in contact with people that maybe have moved away. You can meet people that you would have never met. And a lot of times we are replacing those online relationships, whether they're actually two-way relationships or it's us being invested in another person with real life in-person connections. And I have seen that a lot in my work, especially with teens, but even with people in my own life.
I am so fascinated by that topic. I actually did my doctoral research on it, and like one very
Oh,
small part
really?
of it is social media can like really improve your mental health, really improve your feeling
Hmm.
of connectedness, like you said, or it could have the opposite effect, and it's how you use it. Like if you're a
Hmm.
social loafer, you're just passively scrolling, you're not making connections, you're not commenting and getting the feedback. You're going to feel more depressed online, but if you're an active social media user, you're posting more, you're making more friendships, you're actively connecting and speaking with people, like those people are often happier through their social media use. So it's like it's a tool, and you really have to learn to
Hmm.
make it work for you and not against you.
Hmm. I love that. I just brought that up and it happened to be your doctoral research. So for the listeners, we did not plan that. I just happened to bring it up and Sabrina jumped in with that. That's wonderful. So when it comes to relationship work, one thing you're really passionate about discussing is the navigation of jealousy, competition, and envy. So to really kick off our discussion, can you discuss why these things tend to show up in relationships, romantic, platonic, work, friendships, whatever you want to discuss specifically?
Yeah, jealousy and envy and competition are one like completely normal emotions. If you're human, you've felt
Hmm.
these things before. And I think they're very quickly labeled as bad or ugly emotions, and because of that they're like disowned and we're not really taught like what to do with them. I think just a little bit of context, evolutionarily we lived in small tribes with very finite
Yeah.
resources, so if one person in that tribe was the strongest or the smartest, they were way more likely to survive and secure resources. That meant like someone in that tribe probably was going to go hungry, and if one person was more desirable, it directly impacted their access to resources and food and partners and shelter. So, comparison back in the tribal days and tribalism mindset, it was not optional. It was very closely tied to your survival. You constantly had to look around you to see what were your odds at survival. And the hard part is that physically we are way out of the tribe, but mentally we still think in those terms. Like we're still living in that world at times. So now someone else's success or beauty or achievement in some way with work, or if they're getting like married or having kids or buying a home, it doesn't actually reduce what's available to you. Like we have this like global kind of marketplace, but I think the
Hmm.
problem is our brains haven't caught up. We get pulled back or into that portal of like the tribalism and we react as if them having more means that we're gonna have less somehow.
Hmm.
And like that is a very scary feeling, one to sit with. And instead of acknowledging that feeling and kind of using it as a tool, we're rejecting that feeling. And it's some term like projective identification. We try to disown it and push it out as fast as possible. And the way a lot of people do that is they just say that that person must have done something to provoke that bad feeling in me. Like they're showing off or they don't deserve it or they're being really competitive with me. And our focus goes on to pushing them off of that pedestal
Hmm.
instead of turning inwards.
Yeah. Wow. Like, obviously, most people listening to this podcast probably knew that, we used to live in tribes. I mean, it's the whole collectivist nature of how humans survived. But the way you just put it into perspective of how our brains haven't really caught up. So, and it's paralleling what you said earlier of just, how we show up in relationships or how we react in relationships are likely impacted by past experiences. But when you just put it into that perspective of, our brains are still reacting as if somebody buying a house suddenly means that we don't have a home, even if we're not like cognitively thinking in those terms, but we're feeling that same way. Like we're feeling less resourced. I don't know if that's the right way to phrase it, which from a evolutionary perspective makes sense because if we needed competition to survive, right? If you brought up like being the strongest and things like that, and our brain is still responding in that way, it makes sense that, we feel these things. But then given our current context, like you said, these are uncomfortable emotions to sit with. Like I'm thinking, I would never want to feel competitive or jealous or envy of my best friend. But if, say, she gets something that I don't and I have that reaction, yeah, of course I want to push it away because I'm like, oh, I love you. You're my best friend. But why am I feeling this way? But when you just put it into the evolutionary perspective, that makes a lot of sense. And it helps me. I don't know if it would help other people to be like, okay, this is why I'm having the reaction. Now, what can I do with it?
That's the very important second part. One, it's like acceptance and change, right? Like that's
Hmm.
the most important dyad that we can do in life. Like, of course you feel this way. You're totally valid in how you're feeling, but the way you're acting on it might not be so helpful. So I
Yeah.
think the shift to do there is instead, I think we very quickly can go into this like scarcity mindset of like they
Hmm.
have it, which means there's less available for me, which just is not true, to instead an expansive one. Like they did it, so it shows me that it's possible for me too, or this is what's available to me. They've climbed this path or they've climbed this
Hmm.
mountain. That means I can follow in their shoes. And when you use envy in that way, when you shift out of it into this like what's possible for me mindset, it can then be like a compass for you. That
Hmm.
something no longer controls you or makes you feel bad, but says, no, like this is actually directing me exactly towards what I really want or what's most important right now.
Hmm. I absolutely love that shift because I do think for many of us, our initial reaction is that envy or jealousy and that scarcity mindset that you highlighted, rather than looking at people and saying, like, okay, if they got it, I can do it too. Um, yeah, thank you for that perspective shift. That's really
Yeah.
helpful.
Not an easy thing to do, but I
Oh,
think
yeah.
ultimately we'll feel better when we learn to do that.
Hmm. Well, and another thought that just popped up in my mind is I wonder for some people too, having that perspective shift makes them then reflect on, is this actually something I want?
Mhm.
Or was my first reaction just because I saw this person achieving something that I don't have? And then once you actually have that reflection or the mindset shift of like, oh no, this teaches me that I can do it, and you start thinking about that, it may make some people reflect on like, okay, is this actually something I want? Or can I actually just be happy for my friend or partner or coworker, whoever it is, and focus on what I want in life instead?
I love that because I think you're saying it's not actually about the thing. We often
Hmm.
have envy about how we think it's going to make us feel. So it's not usually about the
Yes.
material success. It's, oh, they must feel secure. They must feel really safe in some ways, or they must feel really confident. They must really love themselves. And I think that's where envy and friendships fail. Like just because you copy that friend or just because your friend maybe imitates you doesn't mean that she's going to feel the way you do. I love this quote too. It's like, envy no one because for everything someone might have, a price has been paid. And oftentimes, like, we maybe don't want to pay that price to get to
Hmm.
that place that they made it. But we like the fantasy of it, or maybe how we think it'll feel on the outside.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's what I was getting to, but you worded it much more beautifully than me. But it is true. I think a lot of times we look, especially with social media, at people, what they're posting, their new house, their vacation, and people are posting them smiling and talking about how happy they are or the joy they feel. And Yeah, now reflecting, I think a lot of times we are seeking those positive experiences, not the, experience or the thing itself, but like the experience of feeling happy or joy or safe or secure, whatever that positive emotion or feeling is.
I think the more I work with people, the more I realize that that's what people are truly looking for, just to
Hmm.
be happy, to feel safe, to feel secure in themselves. And like the low-hanging fruit, the shortcut to that is hopefully getting like the things around that, like the shiny objects or the attractive partner to make you feel that
Hmm.
security. But you can never get that sense of security from the outside. You have to build it within. And that's why that shift is so important from focusing on what they have and all that you don't versus saying, how can I make my own grass greener? Let me stop like
Hmm.
looking across the fence.
Yeah, absolutely. So you shared from a like historical evolutionary perspective. Obviously, jealousy, competition, envy were important for survival. And you also just shared that feeling these experiences or experiencing these feelings can help prompt that mindset shift from scarcity to abundance. Are there other times where jealousy, competition, and envy could even be healthy in relationships? And if so, like how might that work or look?
Yeah, I think unfortunately they very quickly are cast off as these ugly emotions that we're not allowed to really show to other people or even admit to ourselves. And that's a real
Hmm.
shame because these emotions can be signals for so much growth. Oftentimes they can be a compass for the drive that we might feel to get to the place that we want to be. And so it's so important to really sit with them and say, how can these be useful? So I like to think of envy and competition, jealousy as signals, not drivers. These are emotions that are meant to give you information, but not control your behavior.
Hmm.
So Carl Jung has this amazing quote that I absolutely love. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life over and over again, and you're just going to call it fate. And that's where we see like a victim mindset or like this always happens to me. I'm never going to be chosen. And the
Hmm.
goal is instead to reflect on what you would otherwise act out. So instead of reacting to your friend or someone who maybe has more than you would pause and say, what meaning am I making out of this? Or what does this story, what story am I telling myself about this? Or what feels at risk right now for me? And I think envy can feel especially useful in these moments because it's telling you exactly what's most important to you right now. And then
Hmm.
again, the shift is not, wow, they're showing me what I don't have, but what is possible for me, what I
Hmm.
could get. So it's
Yeah.
really a map towards usually like unrealized potential, areas that you feel like you could be achieving, but you're just not.
Hmm. Yeah. I love how you said they are signals. And when I was hearing you talk, it does take a lot of self-reflection, which can be difficult because one, we have to sit with the uncomfortable feeling, which you said earlier in our discussion. Like a lot of people just want to push it away because we don't like feeling uncomfortable as humans. And a lot of times as humans, it's much easier to place blame on someone else than it is to pause and reflect and say, okay, I'm feeling this way. What is this communicating to me about my goals or things that, I don't like to say weaknesses, but maybe growth areas to use like what the questions that we always got in grad school interviews, like what are your growth areas? Um, but I think what I'm hearing you say is that if you identify these feelings as signals and a map for potential and take the time to reflect, pause, actually, you know, sit with yourself, sit with the discomfort, sit with your thoughts about your desires, it's going to benefit you significantly more in the long run.
Absolutely, that you can use them as an opportunity for growth. And unfortunately, growth usually does happen in the dark moments, right? Like
Hmm.
in the valley or after we've had some kind of heartbreak or trauma or loss. And so the cheat code in life is to use those moments as a catalyst to say, okay, now I'm going to use this as my fuel, and now I'm going to
Hmm.
really like take all that I have to kind of get to where I want to go. And pain, envy, jealousy, those are all sources of fuel to say, wait, I can reinvest that energy back into myself.
Hmm. I love that. I can reinvest that energy back into myself. That was a great line there.
Thank you.
So, so we just obviously talked about how jealousy, competition, envy can lead to more positive outcomes. But when does jealousy, competition, and envy become problematic in relationships? And what might be some signs that these feelings are becoming problematic interpersonally?
Yeah, this I see a lot because jealousy and envy, it often operates like unconsciously, and
Hmm.
they become most problematic when it's not about you relating to the other person in a vacuum. Instead, now there's all these other layers in between you and that other person. And those layers could be like your insecurity. Are you not feeling enough? Are you feeling like you're very much stuck or not getting to where you
Hmm.
want to in life? So at that point, you're not seeing the other person clearly. There's all these lens in between you and them, and you're relating them to them almost like before them, there's this big bleeding like gunshot wound that is like so painful, and that's what you're immediately reacting to. And so you're
Yeah.
already in this like defensive stance. And instead of tending to that wound directly, a lot of people regulate it indirectly and it hurts their relationships. They'll criticize their friends, they'll compete with them, they'll reach out and then withdraw. That they'll put them down to kind of feel in control or more secure. So in that way, like envy can very much go into the driver's seat and kind of hijack your
Hmm.
relationships.
Yeah. What I'm taking away from that, and please let me know if I'm misinterpreting you at all, is that when we have these feelings and they're kind of coloring how we see the other person, we're probably identifying unconsciously, most likely, things that reinforce those beliefs of envy, jealousy, competition. Maybe we're, more attuned to things that annoy us or finding things to criticize more because we are looking through that lens, which, of course, yeah, if you're withdrawing from your friends, if you're criticizing them, if, I don't know, maybe you're short or snappy with them because you're operating from this lens, that is definitely going to hurt the relationship.
Absolutely, because you're seeing everything they're saying through the lens of like who's better or like
Mhm.
someone has to be above or below the other person. Someone's more ahead or like has more. And that's getting in the way of really connecting with them because you can't really be close to someone and like an even playing field that you're always competing with as either above or
Mhm.
below. So like a signal that envy or competition is in the driver's seat of your relationship is that you feel that wound of not being good enough, like be very activated, way more
Mhm.
than you feel connected to them, or like you are comparing what you're going through compared to what they're telling you, more than like really trying to understand what they're sharing with you. And a lot of
Mhm.
the times you might be managing those painful feelings that are being ignited in you by changing what they're saying, by diminishing them in some way, and kind of like putting them down. And you might not even consciously do it, but it's a way to kind of just make yourself feel a little bit better, even the playing field.
Mhm. When you just said the thing about you're comparing what you're going through to whatever they're going through, it triggered this thought in me that it sounds like you can't even be as present in your relationships because the way you worded it, I envisioned like two friends, trying to have a conversation. One is trying to explain this thing that they're going through, and the other sitting there just thinking about all they're going through. So they're not present, they're not actively listening, they're not able to show up in the way that maybe they were previously when envy, competition, jealousy wasn't in the driver's seat.
Exactly. And I think human beings are just very smart with body language, how someone is living in their body, their facial expressions. We can pick up on how other people feel. But like
Hmm.
relationships are so layered and multifaceted, right? Like we can have a friend for years, and usually it's our oldest friends that we experience this competition with because often start out in the same place and then life
Hmm.
takes different paths. So I think if you're feeling it, your friend might also feel it in some way. And I think that's why it's so important to learn to work with or learn how to talk about in a way that can feel safe.
I love how you highlighted this comes up a lot with the oldest friends you have because it makes me, and you highlighted that, a lot of times you might start in the same place and then go to completely different places. And it maybe reflect on, you might have a friend from high school, and in high school, there's only so much variation in what success is and things like that. There's obviously some variation, but when you get into adulthood, there's things like, do you go into a career right away? Do you go to college? Do you go to grad school? Buying house, marriage, kids, like all of those things. Um, and it makes sense that going back to one of the first things you said, you have all these other relationships that show up into the current relationships. But a long-standing friendship, you have different versions of yourself probably also showing up in those relationships. So 14-year-old you is going to be different than 21-year-old you and different than 30-year-old you. And if you've maintained friendships that long, the version of the friend is also going to be different. And whether you're still meeting the person where they're at, whether you have diverged, whether you're holding on to past versions of them or you, I would imagine that all plays a factor in it as well when it comes to these feelings.
Absolutely. I love that so much because I think we're not always taught that friendships will ebb and flow depending on which version of you maybe you're cultivating or layers that you're shedding of your identity or kind of where you are in your life. And that's totally normal that often our oldest friendships, we're not always going to have such a closeness with them. And that's actually totally healthy and normal. So I think it's about readjusting our expectations around friendship to more realistic ones that we're not always going to have that one best friend throughout our entire life. Like they might
Mhm.
come and go, and that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm assuming myself and listeners can guess some of the things you're about to say, but I do want to talk about some of the negative outcomes of experiencing jealousy, competition, and envy in relationships. You've already started to highlight some of them when we talked about when it becomes problematic, but in your work, what have you seen are common negative outcomes of these emotional experiences?
I think there's a paradox to jealousy and envy because there's attraction or there's a real like interest in that person. So the paradox is that it's creating distance in the very place that we really want connection or we're looking for connection. I think when you are in this really jealous mindset, you're not actually with that other person. You're in your own
Mhm.
internal world, and that can show up as being really defensive towards them or even critical or like what you said, you're not fully present with them and maybe what they need from you as a friend. And I think when you're really jealous, like it's eroding your sense of self. You don't feel good about yourself. You're creating distance in your relationship. So it's really like a lose-lose because if
Mhm.
you're constantly comparing yourself to someone else, you're constantly losing touch with your own kind of value and identity. So I think that's maybe the worst ways that jealousy and envy can show up, that it's pushing away the people closest to you that could be a sense of support or could help you get to where you want to be. And also it's making you feel not good enough.
hmm Oh, absolutely. And I think that goes back to something that we touched on earlier of how we need this human connection, connectedness as people to thrive. We rely on other people for support. Loneliness does have negative consequences for us, for our physical health and our mental health. And if we are pushing the supports away that we need the most, we're reinforcing those feelings of loneliness. We're isolating ourselves. And that's going to negatively impact us further beyond the loss of relationship itself or beyond those feelings of poor self-worth that you were highlighting.
Absolutely. To be alive is to experience envy and jealousy and all those ugly emotions. And it's so important to accept that and to not throw away relationships just because they're igniting those feelings in us. It's about really keeping them and learning how to work through them.
hmm So with that being said, how can people start working through these feelings? How can people navigate these feelings, especially when it comes to interpersonal relationships?
Yeah, one of my favorite phrases is practice the pause instead of immediately reacting based on emotion or what you're feeling in the moment. Because most people do, they act
Yeah.
on the feeling to regulate it. The work instead is to stay with that feeling long enough to understand it and be more intentional, right? Like the Viktor Frankl quote, between stimulus and response, there is space for you to intentionally decide what you want to do with it. So in
Mhm.
that space, ask yourself, what does this actually mean about me? What feels really threatened right now in the relationship? And then recognize the part of you that you're feeling, it's probably much older or it predates that moment with you and your friend. Usually it's tied to an experience in your early life where you didn't feel chosen or valued or enough, and it felt like you need to compensate with all these other things to feel good enough in yourself. So I think with a lot of these emotions, you're not just reacting to your friend, you're reacting to a very long history and ultimately a story that you are carrying around into every interaction. So the shift when you feel this emotion is to address that wound directly in you instead of
Mhm.
managing it through the other person. And like this is the most brave part, but the thing that will actually give you closeness is to say, I'm noticing I'm feeling a little bit insecure right now. I want to try to understand why. You don't even need to interpret it. Just like be vulnerable and share that with your friend instead of saying, you're making me feel this way. Like that's
Mhm.
creating distance, that's going to polarize and make your friend feel defensive. It's nonviolent communication. Focus on I, and you'll see your friend will match you. They'll be curious too and want to help you understand it.
Mhm. You said so many great things there. So the first one I wanted to touch on was recognizing the old wounds and where is this coming from? Because like you said, it's probably a pattern. It probably stems back to, I think the example you gave was a time you didn't feel chosen. In the moment, though, we often don't recognize that's what's coming up for us. We're just like, oh, our friend decided to go out with that friend and I didn't get an invite. And now you're feeling jealous of the other friend or whatever it is. Which, once again, I want to highlight, as we already have, this does take work and it's not easy. But I imagine if you pause and you are able to identify, like, ooh, okay, this is bringing up feelings of when I was in seventh grade and so didn't pick me to be on their kickball team, you'll start noticing other patterns. And when you recognize those patterns, it's going to be easier to navigate things as they come up in your current relationships.
Exactly. Yes, the past is so much alive in the present, and it's so helpful for us to see when those ghosts from the past are being activated so we can be more intentional in our current relationships.
hmm And then the second thing you said that I think is so important is actually naming it with the person, which I agree. Like, that is scary. Like, who wants to tell their friend, like, I'm actually feeling really jealous of you right now? Or I've noticed that I feel like I have to be in competition with you, and that is making me not show up in a way I want to. However, going back to something you said earlier in our discussion, a lot of times our first reaction is just to push the feeling away. And we both, as psychologists, know if we just suppress things, like that's not gonna fix anything. But a lot of times we feel much more relief when we finally say the scary thing out loud.
Twofold relief, right? Like we feel better about it when we share our pain with other people, somehow it dissipates. And two, our friends will feel closer to us too. And hopefully we
hmm
can find some kind of resolution because ultimately it's not about your friend or whatever it is they did. It's about the feeling it ignites in you. And again, the compass, it's calibrating. It's telling you where you really should be looking, where you should be investing your energy in.
hmm And I would imagine too, depending on the closeness of the friendship or how long you all have been friends, saying that out loud, the friend can offer perspective. I'm thinking, if this is a longtime friend, they might have insights about you that are blind spots to you. So, you know, I don't imagine a friend's going to be like, am I reminding you of, you know, middle school kickball? But it might be like, you know, thank you so much for telling me, explain to me more what's coming up. And since they have known you so long or know you so well, they may be able to pick up on patterns of like, oh, I remember you talking about this with me with this person, or, you know, I've felt that way in this situation. Can you reflect on any similar situation? So kind of like a sounding board, maybe.
100%, and reinforcing the fact that your friend isn't actually competing with you. They're not trying to take from you. They're trying to help you. And it's showing
Hmm.
you that if you're vulnerable, you're going to be rewarded with maybe getting more feedback, learning about yourself, and kind of learning in community or with other people. And that's taking a very scary emotion that maybe you wanted to suppress or you wanted to withdraw from the other person from to instead saying, wow, if I sit with it and share it with this person in a way that can be useful, I can transform it into something really helpful.
Hmm. And what you just said there about reinforcing that your friend is not in competition with you, which we talked about earlier, is the opposite of when jealousy and envy is in the driver's seat and you're seeking out any sign or your brain is identifying any sign to reinforce those feelings that they are. So talking about it is going to open up more opportunities to identify, hey, these feelings that I'm feeling are valid. And their behaviors are not aligning with my emotional response.
Absolutely. The more we communicate, the more opportunities we have to reality check and say,
Hmm.
no, my worst fear actually isn't true here. And I'm much safer. I can actually take control of the situation in a way that preserves the relationship and makes me feel better in the process.
Hmm. I love that you just highlighted reality checking because it is a great tool to have when we're sitting with uncomfortable emotions or difficult emotions and we're just festering in them and not really processing or doing anything with them. Our reality is blinded by those emotions, like you mentioned earlier. And so everything that we view is through the lens of those emotions versus once it's out in the open, that relief that we talked about, you're thinking clearer in the sense of you're not just through the lens of whatever emotion is driving the bus.
100%. There's actually, I recently saw a study of brain scans of people who have sat stagnant in a room for an hour versus people who are active and were walking. And the brain lights up. It's more active when you're engaging in movement. And I think it just speaks to the analogy of why we need to speak about things and how
Hmm.
isolation and stagnation and kind of ruminating in that kind of stagnant place, it doesn't help us at all. It just reinforces the threat and makes us kind of stay put versus being active, talking about things, and like openly trying to connect and work through them is the place we want to be. It helps us move the needle further.
Hmm. Well, and going off of that, if we're just ruminating on things, we're not taking action for anything to be different. And, you know, we're talking about specifically friendships here. If this is a friend you value, enjoy spending time with, just sitting and ruminating on those emotions is not going to change your emotions. If anything, it's going to, you know, cause all those negative outcomes that we talked about. And so, for anyone listening, if you've experienced this, and like, yes, the thought of talking about it is scary, but I ask my clients this a lot, like, how's that working for you? How's it working sitting and just thinking about how jealous or envious you are? And a lot of times they're like, okay, well, it's not working, but I don't know what else to do.
This is the hardest part, and you've got to be so honest with yourself that,
Hmm.
yeah, it doesn't feel good to sit in those feelings, but they're the stories that we are familiar and comfortable with. And
Yeah.
sometimes we choose a familiar hell over the unfamiliar
Yeah.
new way of operating in the world. And that's why it's so important to take that one risk, to say that one thing to your friend and be super open and vulnerable, because it has the opportunity to create all these neural pathways, all these new ways of living in the world. And it's
Hmm.
usually absolutely worth it.
Yeah. I love so much that you just highlighted that comfortability of sitting with those difficult emotions because it is true. Like a lot of people will choose comfort, even if the comfort is uncomfortable, then challenging their self to step outside of their comfort zone because even though they know, oh, there's potential for this to go well, there's also potential for it to not. So let me just stick to what I know. I know these patterns. I know, how I'm feeling, and I'll just stay here because the familiar feels safe, even if it's not benefiting us.
That is the ultimate goal. Somehow a way to make the uncomfortable comfortable enough for us to grow and
Mhm.
transform in it. And I think the more we do that, the easier it gets and the more we're rewarded for it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So if someone is listening and they're experiencing feelings of jealousy, competition, or envy in any of their friendships or other relationships, but I know we're really focusing on friendships here, what advice, words of encouragement, first steps, anything that you have for them?
Yeah, it's almost like inner child work. I wish I
Mhm.
could tell that child version of them that there is absolutely nothing wrong with you for feeling these emotions. They are
Mhm.
part of being human, and everyone in this world has experienced them. And what matters is not so much that you feel them, it's what you do with them that really
Mhm.
counts. So instead of judging yourself or feeling shame about these feelings, try to understand them. Say, what is this pointing to in me? And oftentimes it's pointing you to something that's just like begging to be let out. It's the deeper need in you, maybe to feel chosen, or the deeper feeling in you that just never really feels enough or doesn't really feel secure. And the goal isn't to just rid yourself of these feelings. That probably won't ever happen. But it's to
Mhm.
not let these emotions define your behavior or your sense of self-worth or how you're connecting with the people around you.
Mhm. I love that so much because what I heard in that, you know, validate the experience that you are having, give yourself grace, and do the scary thing to do something different. So you're not just suffering. I know that's a strong word, but suffering by sitting in these uncomfortable feelings.
Exactly.
Well, Sabrina, I have enjoyed this conversation so, so much. It's making me do a lot of reflection on my own feelings and relationships. But as we're wrapping up, is there anything I haven't asked you about that you would like to touch on, or anything that maybe we did touch on, but you want to expand on?
I think one thing that people get wrong about relationships is that the goal, like they think, is to just find this one perfect best friend or partner that's going to make you feel secure all the time. And that is just
Hmm.
impossible. That's never going to happen. Security and real security, it's not the absence of feeling anxious or insecure at times. Real security is having the ability and the confidence to move through these negative feelings without
Hmm.
losing yourself or without losing parts of the relationship in the process. So the work is you learning how to build internal security to say when these emotions come up, they're not going to take over. They're not going to jump into the driver's seat. They might be a passenger on my bus, but they're way in the back seat and I'm still really in control of what I do and where I'm driving towards.
Hmm. I love that so much because, yes, I agree. I think a lot of people think the best, quote unquote, relationships are with people that always make you feel positive things, always make you feel secure and safe. And yes, hopefully I would argue, and you can tell me if I'm incorrect for arguing this, like in a healthy relationship, you want to feel secure and stable most of the time. But a lot of what we've talked about today is it's not just the other person, it's also you, it's your past showing up. And there are going to be times that maybe the partner or the best friend isn't doing anything different, but for whatever reason, your past is showing up, making you feel not as stable or secure. And based off this discussion, it's in those moments that you need to lean into that and reflect.
Exactly. Yes.
Wonderful. Well, anything else you would like to say before I ask or ask you where people can connect with you, find you, and all that fun stuff?
Yeah, I think we are drawn, we're at a really interesting point of like civilization where we have this choice between like comfort and kind of staying isolated and like the messier path. Comfort is saying, I'm just going to stay home and like scroll Instagram and feel entertained, but like not so connected, versus
Hmm.
the uncomfortable path is like, I'm going to try something new or put myself in this uncertain situation. And I think it's so important to keep on choosing the option that scares us a little bit or that could lead to something different or unfamiliar. And so I think it's something that we need to internally push ourselves towards. And maybe it's like that internal parent that's saying, I'm going to push you to do this thing because I know it's good for you, even though it might not feel so easy or comfortable.
Yeah, I love that. I love that so much. Well, once again, I have thoroughly enjoyed this discussion. Like I said, it's made me reflect a lot on my own feelings when it comes to relationships. But the last question I ask all my guests is where can people connect with you? So if people are listening and they're like, I want to learn more about Dr. Sabrina and relationships and everything we've covered, where are the best places that people can find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at Dr. Sabrina Romanoff, where I share about relationships and emotional patterns and really just how we can understand ourselves better in relationships.
Wonderful. So I will link that in the show notes of this episode. So once again, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and insights and taking time out of your schedule to have this conversation with me today. I have greatly enjoyed it and appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I had a great time with you, Jessica.
And thank you, the listeners, for joining for today's episode of Psych Talk, and I will catch you in the next episode. Bye. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Psych Talk. Please rate, review, and subscribe to the show. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend. Don't forget to follow me on all socials at Jessica Lee, PhD, and the podcast at Psych Talk Podcast on Instagram.